Welcome to Applying Pre-Health Workshop, what you need to know about applying to health profession programs. Today, we're going to talk about the components of an application, review the application portals and dates, as well as an application timeline. So the main components of each of these applications is going to include demographic information. This is essentially, your name, your date of birth, right? Just identifying information. Academic information, test scores, your personal statement, activities and experiences, and letters of recommendation. In the academic information portion, this is where you are going to need a complete list of coursework, prerequisites, and not, and a 3.0 GPA minimum in your cumulative and science and math courses. Also commonly no lower than a C in any of these classes, though depending on your program, sometimes no lower than a B is a requirement. You'll also need a complete list of schools you've attended, as well as official transcripts from every higher education institution you've attended. So every community college, every four-year institution, everywhere you've attended, even if you transferred credit to another institution, the original transcript from each college needs to be submitted. So looking at our academic prerequisites, on the medicine, dental, pharmacy, optometry, and podiatry tracks, here we're going to be looking at 2 semesters of general biology, 2 semesters of general chemistry, 2 semesters of organic chemistry, and typically 1 semester of biological chemistry, as well as 2 semesters of general physics, Psych 101, Assoc 101, and depending on the programs you're applying to, you may want to take anatomy, physiology, and microbiology, or these may be required, right? So this is kind of what you should, have or at least have in process, when you are applying. If you do have questions about any of these prerequisite coursework, I would strongly encourage you to look at our academic requirement workshops on the HPAO website under advising. That will lay out, what all these courses are at Fullerton, a plan for taking them, and kind of generally walk you through that. If you're on a physician assistant track, you're going to have 2 semesters of general biology, 1 semester of genetics, and 1 semester of microbiology. 2 semesters of general chemistry, 1 semester of organic chemistry, anatomy and physiology are required here, and then Psych 101 and Soc 101. Some common recommended coursework, sometimes required, is a semester of medical terminology and a semester of Spanish. For physical therapy, generally you'll need 2 semesters of general bio, 2 semesters of general chem, 2 semesters of general physics, 1 semester of anatomy, 1 semester of physiology, Psych 101, and then usually either a developmental or an abnormal psych course. In addition to these prerequisite courses, there are also a handful of tests that you may need to take depending on your track. For any of the academic tests, we do recommend studying for 4 to 6 months for roughly 6 to 8 hours per week. Getting a book is usually a minimum recommendation. However, if you do have the capacity to enroll in a guided study course, these do tend to be highly effective. Kaplan, Princeton Review, Blueprint, these are all reliable test prep companies, though they're certainly not the only ones out there. They've just been in the game a long time and they do what they do very well. So looking at some of the academic scores, the MCAT would be for, MD-DO programs as well as podiatry programs and some optometry programs except MCAT as well. Testing dates are in January, not in February, and then March through September. October through December is usually taken off as well. Registration will begin the October of the previous year. So dates for 2026, testing dates for January and March through September in 2026 became available October 2025. The DAT, this is specifically for dental programs. Testing dates are throughout the year. However, you do first have to apply for a dent pin through the ADA before you can officially sign up. The same is true for the OAT. This is for specifically optometry. if you they're run by the same kind of platform as the DAT, so the same thing applies. They're offered throughout the year, but you do have to have an individual PIN, which you would apply for through ASCO. The GRE, again, testing dates are offered throughout the year. You can register on ets.org, select your preferred date and location, and then register for a testing date there. Now, the other side of tests that we're seeing more and more frequently are situational judgment tests. And these are meant to assess how you would react in specific situations. The main ones we're seeing right now are the AAMC preview. For this one, testing dates fall between April and October. You register in February of the same year, right? So for AAMs for the preview dates in 2026, you would register February 2026. But you do have to have an AAMC account to register. For the CASPER exam, test dates are available and based on programs you're applying to. So you would identify which programs you're planning to apply to and then sign up for dates relevant through there. You don't have to put every program, one program and then, the assigned dates there. Any test that you take your results would be sent to any program that you have applied to, but you do have to have an applicant number to schedule those. The next component after your kind of academics and section is going to be the personal statement. So your personal statement is an opportunity to sell yourself and provide a narrative component to your application, right? Otherwise, they're going to see, just a list of experiences, et cetera. This is your chance to tie everything together. Depending on the track you're on, it could be, the characters vary slightly, but usually they're roughly around 5,000. Admissions committees use this to assess your written communication skills, and it really is truly a key component of the holistic review process. So when you're approaching your personal statement, there are some general do's and don'ts. You do want to start very early and make sure that you are paying close attention to the prompt. You do want to use meaningful experiences that span your personal, academic, and professional life. You want to be specific and detailed about these experiences, right? What was the situation? What was the task? What action did you take? What result happened? That STAR method, right, for answering interview questions really comes in help and handy here when we're trying to figure out, how to relay what happened in an incident and why it was meaningful. You do clearly want to state why you chose the path you're on and not another. So for instance, if you're applying to medical school, why do you want to be a doctor and not a pharmacist, right? And you don't want to say like, this is what I hate about pharmacy, right? But you want to clearly identify what are the key components of being a doctor that are unique to being a doctor, and how do those align with my career goals, my values, right? Do consider addressing any major pitfalls on your application. If you know that you have a semester where you did really poorly, right, on some of your prereq courses, consider making that a component of your personal statement in terms of, what happened? How did you recover? What did you learn from that? How did that affect your journey towards medicine? How has it strengthened your resolve or your resilience? And last, find your pearl and use your own voice, right? What I mean by pearl is find the reason that you're pursuing this path that everything else centers around, right? Is it that you want to advocate for better access for a certain population? Is it that you want to, conduct medical research, right, on a certain like disease or something like that? Is it that you want to bring a more personal touch to, the career field? Whatever it might be, find that pearl in that essence, and all the other experiences around it, tie them back to it. And that's going to create a really good cohesion in your personal statement. Don't try to finish all at once, right? It's really good to get through a draft, take, a day or two. Don't read it at all and come back to it. Also, don't rehash your resume, right? These should be experiences you haven't already talked about that you can go much more into depth with. Also, don't rely on cliches, right? We want to go beyond just, I want to help people, right? Also, don't try to list all your accomplishments. You don't have space. 5,000 characters isn't that much, right? You are not going to be able to talk about all of the, amazing, meaningful things that have gotten you to this point. Your job in this personal statement is to choose three, maybe four experiences that convey a compelling story and narrative for why this path. Don't focus on negatives from other professions, right? So, like I said, when you're trying to say, why this chosen path, we don't want to say, I want to do medicine because XYZ career, doesn't do this and can't do that, right? Instead, what we want to say is we want to look at that and say, okay, so what I like about medicine is the, level of control that I have, and I want to use that to advocate for patients, right? Something like that. Right. So you want to look at the positive of what the career you've chosen has and how that aligns with your goals. And the same thing, while we do want to consider addressing pitfalls, you don't want to focus on it from a negative perspective, right? You don't want to, get into excuses or, the specifics of what happened. We want to touch on it, right? Identify that this is a component of, our experience. And then move on to how did you address it? How did you overcome it? What skills did you gain because of it? Beginning your statement, there are kind of like four exercises that I find really helpful. So the first I like to call my pre-health journey journal. So if you are not, writing it right now, maybe if you're still, a year or so off from your application cycle, start a journal where you're reflecting once a semester on impactful experiences you had, what you learned from those experiences, and how that connects to your pursuit of a career in healthcare. Also, an activity that's, kind of similar is retracing your steps. So this is where I like to say, create a timeline of events in your life, fill it in with, moments that were particularly important along your pre-health journey, right? That inspired you along this path, that challenged you along this path, and fill that in with details. And then go back after you filled that in and identify themes and then go through and choose the experiences whose themes support each other, right? Like I said, you're not going to be able to include all of those experiences, even though they're all meaningful. You want to choose the ones that kind of meld and mesh together the best, again, to create that cohesive voice and narrative through your statement. You can also use mind mapping exercises, right? So starting through, what kind of initially brought you to this field. Maybe you witnessed a medical injustice, right? So that led you to want to help people in similar situations. You decided to become a doctor. And so in order to get clinical experience, you started volunteering. Now let's think about times that you have advocated for patients in your clinical experiences, right? That can connect back to, that initial impetus for wanting to become a doctor of witnessing that medical injustice, right? So in my clinical experiences, I have, used that passion to inform my advocacy for the patients I work with. And last but not least, I like to call this is your life, right? Think about the stories that you tell other people about yourself and, think about what stories or ask other people what stories they tell about you. What do you notice about those stories? What are the defining qualities and values that you're talking about, right? How do those things align with your choice to pursue a healthcare path? And then, think about moments and experiences, where those align with your desire to pursue healthcare. In addition to your personal statement, you will also have a section related to activities and experiences. So this is where all of your clinical, research, volunteer, and extracurricular activities are going to come in. Most programs do not limit the number of experiences you can list, but a few do. So AMCAS, right, for MD programs, you are allowed 15, but you are also allowed to identify 3 as meaningful. For ACOMAS for DO, you are also limited to 15, but you do not have that meaningful designation. And then for AdSAS, there is no technical limit, but you are able to identify 6 of them as meaningful that will kind of be featured more prominently. In this section, we want to highlight our leadership skills, teamwork, collaboration, and communication skills, and some common topics to think about including here. Obviously, your clinical experience, but also research experience, community service, any like faith-based activities you're involved in, student group membership, as well as hobbies and work. Some of the most impactful applications I've read in the past few years have been framed through the lens of looking at a person's hobby and what value that hobby has for them and how it relates to their desire to pursue the healthcare path. So these are still really valuable experiences to use in these activities and experience sections, even though they're not directly related to the academic or clinical space. The last section here is going to be your letters of recommendation. So typically I get students that ask, who should I ask? How should I ask them? And when should I ask them? So in terms of who to ask, you would want to ask academic and professional references that know you well. And I would recommend asking for at least 4. The reason being is usually most programs have a minimum of 3. And if you ask for 4 and one of them gets lost in the ether, then you're still meeting that requirement. When you are asking for them, if you are asking a person that you see regularly, right, every week or even every month, I strongly recommend asking in person. Even let's say it's a faculty member that you don't have a class with this week. If you do some research and look into when their office hours are and, stop by and ask them personally, that's really meaningful to a person, right? And it's going to leave them with a very, positive feeling about you as they're going into writing this letter. If you don't see them regularly, if they're, not someone that you could easily meet in person, you can ask via email. And you always, when you do ask, want to remind them how they know you, right? So if you're emailing them, say, hey, I was in your lab, a year ago, and, I really appreciated working on this project with you. And you can also outline key qualities you want them to speak to, right? So if you, completed a specific project or like were recognized for, your accomplishment in a certain class, right? You can say like, I particularly like your, opinions related to the work I did on XYZ project, right? So you can kind of outline for them what are some of the things that you think were the most valuable experiences you had with them. And when to ask, generally, I say give at least 3 months for that initial ask and then follow up 1 month before just to make sure that they remember. If you are, let's say you're going to take a couple gap years or 1 gap year and you want a letter from a professor you have right now, you can consider using a service like Interfolio where you would create an account and then send a request link from Interfolio to the person writing the letter. The person would then upload it directly to Interfolio and it would sit in your account. It's a protected file. You can't access it. You can't read it. But it's under your direct ownership in your Interfolio account. And then when you do go to submit your application, you would send the request from your application portal to Interfolio and it would automatically get uploaded from there. So that's a good way to kind of hang on to letters. I will say generally, you don't want letters to be dated more than like 2 years away from the application portal. But it can be a good way, again, to kind of allow someone to write with, recency in mind and then, save up if you're applying within the next year or 2. All right, now reviewing the application portals and their dates. So we are recording this in November of 2025. The 2025-2026 application cycle is still open. Dates for 2026 have not been released. However, this is a general time that they open. They tend to open around this same time. So if you're applying to MD programs, your portal is AMCAS. That tends to open early May and submit at the end of May. If you're applying to DO programs, your portal will be ACOMAS. This tends to open at the beginning of May. Dental programs is ADSAS. They open middle of May, submit early June. PharmCAS is for pharmacy, middle of July. OptomCAS is for optometry, end of June. Podiatry, I don't have a fun, quippy shortening for this, but AACP MAS, the application system there, early August. PT-CAS, physical therapy, is June 16th. CASPA, physician assistant, end of April. Occupational therapy is OT-CAS. It's usually like middle to end of July. And VM-CAS is for vet sciences. This is kind of an exception. It tends to open late January, but you can submit it in early May. Another main thing to consider when you are approaching your application cycle is the intent to apply process offered by the Health Professions Advising Office. So this would begin the fall prior to your application cycle. It is going to provide an honest review of your application strength, as well as a vote of confidence from your academic institution, a streamlined letter upload. But I think the most beneficial thing that it does is kind of force you through a mock application process and get you thinking about those components, the personal statement, the activity section, you're listing all of your coursework, before you actually have to go into the application cycle in the middle of your, spring and summer semesters. So what it gives you is a committee letter packet, which consists of a letter packet with a letter of recommendation from our health professions committee, as well as all letters of recommendation you submitted as part of the application. To qualify for this process, you do need to have a minimum of a 3.0 cumulative and science and math GPA. You do not have to have your test taken at the time of the intent to apply application, but you do have to have a date scheduled. For hours, for everything except PA, you need to have at least 100 clinical hours at the time of application. For PA, you need at least 1,000. If you have questions about clinical hours, I recommend attending our clinical hour workshop to learn more about why that PA distinction exists and how to go about earning some of these hours. You'll also need a minimum of 2 letters of recommendation, 1 academic and 1 professional, though you can submit up to 8. You will need transcripts from every undergraduate institution, though we do not need them to be official. You can download the unofficial ones and send them our way. We're totally fine with that. And there is a $20 program fee. This is not per school, it's per program. So you can apply to 20 MD programs and it's $20. But if you apply to 20 MD programs and 1 DO program, that's $40. We are going to write a completely separate letter for the DO programs because it is a different focus. And so that's why that differentiation is there. So looking at our application timeline, given what we know about, the portal opening dates and the intent to apply application, we're going to use students who are in the 2025-2026 application cycle as an example. They started their intent to apply application in fall 2024. This is when they scheduled their test dates and started reaching out to potential letter writers. In spring 2025, they submitted their intent to apply. They were taking any required tests with at most 1 month out from the application opening, right? They're finalizing personal statements, formally requesting those letters of recommendation, continuing prereqs if necessary, ordering transcripts, and then this is when the PA application opened. In the summer of 2025, this is when the rest of the applications are open and being submitted, continuing coursework. This is when the bulk of supplementary applications are starting to come in. And mock interviews, we're starting those because in the fall, they are finishing their prereqs. This is when we recommend to do that. There might be some final supplemental applications, but for the most part, this is when the bulk of interviews are going to be done, and some early admissions towards the end of November, into December are coming out. Then in spring 2026, if they haven't already, this is when they're graduating. There are, maybe a handful more interviews, but this is when the bulk of admissions are going to come out. They're going to accept their admission. Summer 2026, attend an orientation, and fall 2026 is when they would matriculate or begin their program. So you can see, right, given these portal dates, given the intent to apply, these, if they want to start in fall 2026, their application, started, right? Started in its kind of conception it 2 falls before that, 2 years before that. So this is a long process. It is very likely that you may not be ready for various reasons when we are looking at this, right? And so you may end up deciding to or needing to take a gap year. So some effective ways to consider spending your gap year, broken down by, why you might be deciding to. If you still have outstanding prerequisites or you have a lower GPA, you might decide to do some additional coursework. If you have a lot of outstanding prereqs, if you're kind of just getting started as you're graduating, you might want to choose to do a formal post-bac program. The benefits of these is that they are, they give you guaranteed access to courses, they have structure and access to other resources, but they tend to be expensive. You could also opt for a DIY post-bac program. This is great if you're, looking to save some money and you're not necessarily worried about having, access to advising resources or things like that. Um, or if you just have maybe a handful, right, a couple more courses to complete, you could, combine courses at a community college with maybe taking courses, back here through Open University. Now, let's say you have, limited clinical experience or limited volunteer experience. You might choose to spend that year, doing a clinical volunteering program, doing some other kind of like volunteer community service work, or, going and getting a certificate to become a healthcare paraprofessional, like an EMT or a medical assistant, something like that, so that you are earning your patient care experience hours. Now, let's say you do have a strong GPA, but you got a low test score. Maybe we're going to spend that year, taking test prep courses and retaking that course. And last but not least, sometimes you're just burnt out. Sometimes you just need a break, right? That's a definite reason to take a gap year, rediscover your passion, right? Whether it's through like volunteering or work or, something like that. You know, reignite that passion for what you're pursuing. Um, working towards a personal goal, right? I think a lot of students sometimes will just take some time to work and earn money. So it's not taking a gap year isn't inherently bad. It doesn't inherently make you a less competitive applicant. What really matters is how you use that gap year and how well you articulate your reasoning behind it and what you gained from the activity you spent that year doing. So that covers our content related to the application process and timeline. If you have questions about academic requirements, clinical and volunteer requirements, or want to review just a real quick review of the application timeline, you can find all those workshops on our website under the advising tab. I hope you found the content in today's workshop useful, and I wish you all the best on your pre-health journey.